After 8 long years, Metroid Prime 4 is finally out. So, did it live up to the expectations? Let's talk about it. This video will include spoilers, so if you haven't played the game or are planning on playing it in the future, please click off this video now. I have other Metroid videos on my channel, by the way, if you want to see something while you wait to play Prime 4. You have been warned. I just finished the game a few hours ago and I did my best to stay away from any media regarding Metroid Prime 4, just to make sure that my thoughts on the game weren't swayed. However, I did see some criticism on Soul Valley, which I'll dive into later. One of the very first things I noticed from the moment I booted up the game was how beautiful it looked. This was my second experience with the Nintendo Switch 2, the first being Mario Kart World, and my god does this game look phenomenal on the Switch 2. The environments are full of life and color, the textures look amazing, and the game looks like it's been perfectly made for the new console. One of the things I really loved about the game was the environments and the dynamic aspect to them. From the beginning of the game, we are tossed into a tutorial of sorts, but you can see so much going on within the world. As Samus travels through ceiling pipes in her morph ball, we can actively see fights going on in the background in real time. You'll see space pirates tossing barrels, Galactic Federation soldiers fighting back, all of these little attention to details. Once you get past the tutorial area, you have access to 6 main environments. You have Fury Green, a jungle and forest environment, Flare Pool, a volcanic zone, the Great Mines, a big underground mining facility, Volt Forge, a viola factory, Ice Belt, a windy and icy mountainous region, and Soul Valley, a desolate desert. Quite literally desolate. Fury Green is the first area you're able to explore, and it's definitely one of my favorites. One of the really cool details I liked about this section was how it used amber or a similar looking material to hide unlockables. Normally you might have a cracked wall or a similar visual cue to guide the player to an unlockable, but I really like how natural this looked within the world. As you explore further, you will find remnants of a temple and eventually reach a bridge that leads to Soul Valley. The scenery of the giant tree in the background with Soul Valley looming over the distance was just breathtaking. Volt Forge was a really interesting location. I don't think this is a setting that has been explored previously in a Metroid game before. There were some clever puzzles you needed to solve using your morph ball to get ahead, and the tutorial for Viola was fun. Riding around this Tron-like track was something I wasn't expecting out of a Metroid game. I mentioned earlier how I really like the dynamic aspect to the environments, and this section has some interesting gameplay elements as well, like using Viola parts to not take damage from the lasers and having to shoot a glass window to forge a path ahead. Ice Belt is the next area you're able to explore, and this is 100% my favorite area. This area was by far the strongest in my opinion. I love the utilization of the psychic powers to get the puzzle pieces needed to open some of the gates in this section. Another thing I want to point out is how amazing the lighting looks in this game. Usually when you have cutscenes in video games, they tend to look better since most of the time it's not gameplay, but this game looks phenomenal both in the cutscenes and the gameplay. This section in particular starts off with no power, so you have to traverse through it all in the dark. After activating the generators, this area comes to life and just looks amazing. But by far, my favorite part of this region was the moment you set foot outside the facility and have to cross a windy cavern. This section is full of little details like seeing the floor crack when you fire a shot into the ground, Samus raising her hand to brace from the wind, and later when you return to this section, the use of the grapple beam to cross the cavern was just so cool. Flare Pool is the next section, and here is where you meet my favorite character, Sergeant Duke. After shutting off the heat, Duke helps you make your way to Armstrong before you all head for the Master Key. Not gonna spend too much time on this, but the lighting effect caused by the lava in this section just looks insane. I was playing this section with a grin on my face the entire time. The boss fight in this section is also one of the coolest in my opinion. I don't like the first phase where you need to follow with Viola, but the second phase has such a cool ending using the control beam. Similar to Ice Belt, the Grand Mines has some really cool attention to detail. You begin at the top of the mine and slowly work your way down to its depths. As you make your way down, your team will slowly be picked off one by one until it's just you and the Master Key ahead. This section was action-packed as any powerful weapon you use would cause an echo effect in the mines, causing you to be bombarded by grievers. I especially liked how you go off the beaten path and travel through the caves to reach the Master Key. I saved Soul Valley for last because this was by far the weakest area in the entire game. I understand it's a desert and deserts tend to not have much going on, but this area really had nothing going for it. Sure, there are Galactic Federation outposts you can explore, but they don't have much going for them. The reason Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom open world works so well is because of all of the content you have to explore within that world. You have shrines, bokoblin camps, caves, mini-bosses, and so much more. Soul Valley has none of these things. You have a few areas you can explore to unlock upgrades to your shot types. a ton of green crystals, and one mini boss. That's really it. On top of that, if you do decide to collect all the crystals and explore all the Federation outposts, you'll get bombarded by enemies which are designed to be combated while riding Viola, but the combat system doesn't feel fun and there is literally no point to taking out the enemies. Most of my playthrough, I just stuck it through and ate the damage because taking the time to take out the enemies was just more tedious. The gameplay is what we all know and love from the Metroid Prime series. You have your scan visor to get information on enemies and the environment, and later on it's also used for the psychic abilities. The psychic abilities was something I was kind of skeptical about when seeing the trailers. I wasn't sure how well this new mechanic would fit within the Metroid games, but it's actually such a cool concept. Being able to place a bomb and pick it up and throw it using your psychic abilities is so cool. I also love the control being able to essentially send a guided missile to scope out an area or use it to solve a puzzle was really cool from a gameplay standard. I just wish the psychic abilities would have been utilized more. Towards the start of the game, one of the first bosses you face was Carvex, a plant-like creature that has been enhanced and taken over by a Metroid. It has these vines that force you to use your control beam to knock them out at the same time in order to stop the regeneration. Later in Ice Belt, you have to use your psychic powers to solve a puzzle and get the keys to open a gate. Then in Flare Pool, the use of the control beam to deliver the final blow on the boss was just chef's kiss. I absolutely loved this, but I noticed that as you progressed more in the story, there wasn't many uses for the psychic abilities, both from a puzzle solving standard and combat as well. I found myself just using them to open doors, which felt more like a gimmick rather than an interesting gameplay element. And maybe this was just on me for not switching visors during boss fights and trying things out, but I feel like it could have had more uses than it did, or it could have been made more apparent that it was an effective tool during combat. Then you have your combat visor, where most of the action happens. Unlike your typical Metroid games, you keep the same type of beam for most of your playthrough, and all of your beam upgrades come in the form of elemental shots. These consume a different ammo type and are used really well. You'll unlock a new shot ammo, and that is what you will primarily be using when traversing the new area you are exploring. The elemental shots are also effective in combat, and you later unlock upgrades to them as well. I found myself switching back and forth between all of them in numerous cases, unlike the psychic abilities. However, I wish they could have had a bigger role. Most of the time I found myself just spamming the beam button as I felt like it lowered health bars quicker. And this could be just placebo or force of habit, but I really feel like just spamming the beam button was better than charging up a shot or a super missile. However, I still really enjoyed the elemental shots, and if I had to pick some of my favorites, it would definitely be the fire and electric shots. Viola was another new addition to Prime 4, and unlike the psychic abilities, I didn't enjoy this one. I get what they were going for. They wanted to give the player a tool to traverse the world quicker and add more variety to the gameplay. After all, Breath of the Wild had this in its DLC and people loved it. The only area where having Viola really makes sense is in Soul Valley. All of the major sections are traversed through normal means, and the only interesting use of it was in Flare Pool when you had to start a boss fight with it. It felt more like a gimmick rather than an enticing gameplay element. On top of that, the combat while riding Viola was not enjoyable. Like I mentioned earlier, there was no point to taking out the enemies in Soul Valley, so I just avoided them most of the time. I don't think adding a motorcycle to the game was a bad idea, but when you add a new gameplay element, there needs to be some enticing gameplay along with it. For example, look at Mario Kart World. People bashed on its open world for the lack of content, but when you compare it to the content we have to explore with Viola, it's miles better. I think the uses we had for Viola during the story were fine, but if they wanted to make it an enticing piece, there should have been more content revolving Viola in the primary area use it. And all we got was just green crystals. We could have had some sort of time trials in the desert or missions to defeat a certain amount of enemies, just something to make the gameplay revolving this new edition not feel so bland. The world design of Prime 4 is something that I feel really underdelivered. After you unlock Viola, you are now fully able to explore Soul Valley to collect the keys you need to teleport out of Euros. The game has you open up your map and see that the keys are scattered all across the world, and Mackenzie even tells you that it's up to you on which one you want to go after first. From here I was like, oh, this is open world. I can get the keys in whatever order I want, but that wasn't the case. I went to Flare Pool because it was the closest to my location after I explored a bit of Soul Valley, but then realized I couldn't explore it till I had an upgrade which came later. This is one of the development decisions I don't really understand. Why place a huge emphasis on Soul Valley, showcase the keys in different areas, and then force you down a linear path? It just doesn't make sense. It gives you a false sense of openness when the game is linear. I think the game was intended to be open world at some point, but maybe due to the need to have this launch within the year the Switch 2 dropped, that might have changed some of the development. And my criticism doesn't come from the game being linear, but when you have linear games, they tend to have some structure to them. For example, Metroid Dread. I recently dropped a 30-minute retrospective about Metroid Dread and essentially glazed Mercury's Steam for how well they cooked on that game. The game was linear, but it never told you where to go. The world design did. You usually unlocked a new ability and you would then utilize that ability to push forward, typically with some backtracking, but it was fresh. You would return to these areas, but there would be a change in the environment, or you would explore a different part of the area that you hadn't been to before. And this was so rewarding. It made you feel like you really unlocked the puzzle, even though that was exactly what the development team intended. Metroid Prime 4 is linear, but it doesn't have these clues. You'll come out of an area with a key in hand, and now you don't know where to go. There isn't anything that points you to the next location until Mackenzie gives you a call and says, hey, maybe you should explore this area. And I just feel like that's really bad writing. It's rushed, and it doesn't really feel rewarding. Although the major areas have you follow a linear path without different ways to access your objective. One of the things that I believe would have added a ton of replayability would have been to make the keys accessible in whatever order the player pleased, and I'm not too sure how they could have brought this concept to life, but it would have made Soul Valley a more well-designed part of the story. Maybe there could have been multiple routes to the keys, ensuring that you could do it in whatever order. That way you would essentially play the game multiple times and have a different but similar experience. And maybe it's far-fetched for me to think this, but the characters don't really interact with one another until you get closer to the end of the story, so I think it could still work and fit the plot. Another idea would have been to show you the location of the next key after you unlock the first. That way the player has an idea of where to head to next without the need to twiddle their thumbs or head to areas only to be stopped because they don't have the requirements needed to explore that section. One of the things that I love about the Metroid series is how its world design guides you. Even in the most linear games like Metroid Fusion, you still have to depend on environmental clues to know where to head to next, and this game just doesn't do that. And I know I'm nitpicking at this point, but another change I would have loved to see was some more quality of life features. Metroid Dread introduced teleporters, which were incorporated into the story, and when you got to the endgame, you could essentially travel to whichever teleporter you wanted to. This made exploring previous areas so much less tedious. Towards the end of Prime 4, Mackenzie gives you teleporter parts, and I assumed this was going to be the use for them, but nope, they were just used to complete the mech. That's it. And I know I'm just nitpicking at this point, but heading from Fury Green all the way to Flare Pool to pick up an upgrade you forgot or vice versa got really tiresome, especially when you head across the desert with nothing really going on in there. To piggyback off this point, another quality of life feature brought to Dread was a completion percentage for the different areas. Prime 4 does give you a completion percentage on items collected as you're playing, but it's not in the areas, it's for the entire game. This would have been another neat thing to add, since I always like to go back and 100% my save file, which, by the way, that's something you can't do. Yeah, normally when you beat a Metroid game and boot it back up, it will take you to a spot where you have access to the whole map, allowing you to go back and collect all the items, but not Prime 4. Once you complete the game and go past the point of no return, that's it. They really mean it. You won't be able to go back and 100% your save file, which doesn't really make sense to me. The story is another area that I believe was a bit underwhelming. But let me start with the positives and things that I really liked. For one, the characters. I mentioned at the start of the video how I did my best to stay away from any form of Prime 4 content to make sure I saw no spoilers, nothing regarding gameplay, story, and so on. However, the internet being the internet, I did see a few things. The amiibo situation, the Soul Valley criticism, and the hate on Mackenzie. But I actually really liked all the characters introduced in Prime 4. You first meet Mackenzie, the guy everyone on the internet seems to hate, but I thought he was an interesting character. He's essentially there as a tutorial and serves the purpose of helping you get your foot in the door to what you will expect when playing this game. You traverse Fury Green with him, and that's about it. He doesn't overstay his welcome and essentially becomes a background character. You have the option to call him on the map screen to hear his inputs, but it isn't forced on you, which was something that I really liked. You then met the rest of the characters, each in a different region. All of these characters were unique and different. They felt like genuine people, especially Sergeant Duke, which is obsessed with Armstrong for some reason. I do gotta admit, rezzing them up the same way that you do in Fortnite did get a chuckle out of me the first time. One of the biggest fumbles of this game was the characterization of Samus. The Metroid franchise is over 40 years old now, and back in the day, players only had gameplay to judge and see what kind of character Samus was. Based on the gameplay, we assume she was calm, collected, and strong. There were some entries that undermined this by making Samus seem like a completely different character in the cutscenes, but then we got Samus Returns and Metroid Dread, which nailed Samus's character perfectly. The cutscenes and actions Samus took outside of the gameplay matched with what we the players knew to expect from her. And this is the same case for Prime 4 until you get to its conclusion. When you explore Flare Pool, you get the chance to work alongside Sergeant Duke and Armstrong. After defeating the boss of the area, you then have to evacuate the volcano and leave before its eruption. There is an emotional scene that plays out in which Samus leaves the escape pod to ensure both Sergeant Duke and Armstrong make it out alive. Samus then finds a clearing and ends up making it out. This scene was emotional and powerful and feels like something Samus would do. Even in previous titles like Super Metroid, you have the option to save the animals, which triggers a different ending to the game. Metroid Fusion played with this further by making those animals be the reason Samus makes it out of the BSL. The point I'm trying to make is that previous titles have established that Samus is the sacrificial type, willing to put her life at risk if it means saving others. The ending to Prime 4 completely undermines all of this. Somehow, due to some miraculous fate, Sylux comes back, and with Samus being the only one able to operate the teleporter, all the Federation soldiers give up their chance to escape in order to hold Sylux down while Samus teleports out of Euros. So that whole emotional cutscene with Samus sacrificing herself in the volcano for Duke and Armstrong is completely undermined now. It's just so frustrating and so poorly written, and I get why they did this. It's the same reason TV shows end their seasons with cliffhangers, to ensure that you come back for the next one. But this conclusion is so unsatisfying in so many ways. And what upsets me isn't that it isn't a happy ending, it's that all of it feels pointless. On top of that, Sylux is not really a compelling villain. When you get to see his backstory at the end of the game, you can't help but say, really? That's why he hates Samus? There could have been a ton of different motives to give Sylux, and this one just wasn't it. It really reminded me of the original Dragon Ball Broly movie, where Broly is an insanely powerful villain, but hates Goku, the protagonist, for the silliest reason. And Sylux acts like him too, just yelling Samus really loudly. However, I do want to talk about something positive, and that is the boss fight that you have with Sylux at the end of the game. This boss fight was a lot of fun. At the start of the fight, you fight alongside the Federation team, having to res some of them up along the way. Sylux creates these really cool looking dragon heads that use the same elemental types that you have to attack you. The second phase has you traveling through space, avoiding whatever Sylux throws at you while sneaking in shots of your own. And the last phase introduced a concept which I've never before seen. Sylux has an attack that will knock an energy tank out of your inventory. This was something that I have never seen done before, and it was so cool to see. It made the fight that much more interesting. Sylux has an interesting move pool in all of the phases, and even a clever use for the control beam towards the end. So did Prime 4 live up to the hype? That is a tough question, because in some aspects Metroid Prime 4 nailed what it aimed to achieve, but in other aspects like the story and the world design, it really underdelivered. For me, Metroid Prime 4 was still an enjoyable game. The combat is what we all know and love from the Prime series. The psychic abilities were a fresh addition that I would have loved to see more of. The environments were beautiful and the bosses within them were fun, but it's still hard to ignore the poor world design and its unsatisfying conclusion. Regardless, I still think the gameplay was fun and enjoyable, and I do plan on doing a second playthrough in its hard mode difficulty in a later date. Thank you guys all so much for watching. At the time of recording this video, we are sitting at 550 subscribers, which is an insane number to me. Thank you guys for all the amazing support, and if you enjoy hearing me yap about video games, consider subscribing. I'll see you all in the next one.